Hello, welcome to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their firsts. I'm your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you're an interesting person in IT, do let us know. You might be the next First Person. The next voice you will hear will be today's guest. He is Greg Finnegan, a founder and expert on cloud technologies. Greg is passionate about building alliances that fuel innovation across cloud ecosystems, and he helps organizations grow. Greg is definitely one of the most interesting people in IT, and we are delighted to have him as a guest on First Person. So, Greg, I say welcome, and first up, what's the first thing people should know about you?
Thanks, Matt. First thing to know about me is I am the founder of Cloudable.ai. It's my company that I set up about a year ago, following a stint that I did at AWS. And I live in Surrey in the UK and winter in the Canary Islands.
Oh, there you go. So we have one thing in common, which is I also live in Surrey in the UK, but sadly I don't winter in the Canary Islands. I winter in Surrey in the UK. So, Greg, let's move on to our first section, which we call First Things First. And this is where we like to get to know about our guests by understanding some of their first times. So I'm really interested to ask you, actually, given your career progression and the things you've done, like, tell us something about your first job in this industry, something about your first job in IT.
Yeah. My first job was at a very innovative company called Ideal Hardware. It was a IT distributor in the mid-90s, run by three very clever and visionary people. And it was an extraordinary place to start a career, especially at my age. I was only probably around 21 years old when I joined. And I joined into the sales team, and the sales team were famously paid commission only.
Right.
So
wow.
if you sell anything, you didn't take anything home. And that wasn't the only sort of unique nature of Ideal. They also got their salespeople in every day, 8 a.m. for product training. So we were, experts in what we sold. And some other very visionary things back then for the mid-90s. James Wicks, the MD, set up something called Channel Vision, which was a TV satellite program that he bought 4,000 set-top boxes when very early days of satellite, and sent them out to our sort of top partners to put in their receptions and showrooms and stuff, and then broadcast programs that were demoing the products that we were selling, which was fabulous. And it really built on some of the other firsts that they did. I think they were the first people to put a catalog onto, then a floppy disk on, and then onto ED. So, it was, I was there for nearly 10 years in various roles, but it was a fabulous place to grow up. And now I still have friends from those days.
It's interesting, though, because we wouldn't often hear from people who start certainly in distribution and in sales roles within that, but that focus on product, which would be a very successful sales tactic, but also is that what made you think that, that this was IT was the place you wanted to be? Was that, what was it that kind of made you feel like this was the space you wanted to be in?
I'll be brutally honest with you, Matt. Although my sister at the time worked for Microsoft and my father was an IT consultant from the 60s, for me, the reason why I got into the tech industry is because the first job I had, which was during my days at college, offered the opportunity to drive a BMW company car.
There you go.
This is the job for me.
Yeah.
So I suppose I could summarize that. I was interested in the money being made in tech in the 90s.
For sure. Yeah.
And so that's what attracted me to it. But very quickly, it became a place where it was, and I met an incredible group of people. Like I said, I just said earlier that I'm still friends with many of them from now coming up 30 years ago. And so that's why I stayed. And as an industry, it's tight circles. And it's something that that's really stayed with me about,
Yeah.
how you always come across someone, very few degrees of separation. They say famously it's 5 for everyone in the world. It's probably 2 in tech.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, you're speaking to somebody who was an editor of a magazine about PCs before he owned a PC. Like, there's two elements in that, right? There's timing, because certainly that period in the mid-90s when there was an explosion in this industry, right? But there's also people, and I think that's something that is really valuable and important. Like it's not that it's irrelevant what the industry is, but like that learning and that grounding, so much of it comes from being with the right group of people, maybe at the right time. And one of the other questions we ask, in this section is, to talk about your first great boss, or the first thing you think about when I say great boss. And it sounds like we've already kind of hit on that a little bit. You were working with people who you were there for 10 years, right? I presume that was 10 years of progression. So I guess you were working for bosses and with bosses who saw your potential and helped you develop?
100%. Yeah. Immediately when you say great boss, I think a gentleman, a very dear friend now, by the name of Alex Tatham. And he was most recently the MD of, I think, one of the largest private companies in the UK, West Coast. But for me, he was the MD of Ideal, and then which became Bell Micro. So for most of my years there, those 10 years, I reported to Alex. And he was fantastically encouraging.
Uh-huh.
He's a very flamboyant, full of character, full of life guy. And he taught me many things that even today, I share with my teams and with my kids, things that Alex told me about, all those years ago.
That's amazing. And then so then at this point, we'd often ask about first promotions, right? But we've done 10 years here. Like, we've seen your career develop. But how do you get from there to where you are now, to founding a business, to working for AWS? What's the transition? What's the career progression from there?
Yeah, I usually put this into 3 phases because they happen to be in or around 10 years for each of them.
Uh-huh.
So this first 10 years with one company, started out as an account manager, ended up as the GM for Europe, left there and joined Symantec. And started basically a 10-year stint in cybersecurity. I worked for Symantec and briefly for Kaspersky, and then finally for Intel Security or McAfee.
Yeah.
So for me, those 2 phases quite deliberate. I left Ideal Bell Micro at a time when it was advantageous to get more into what we call vendor land. Move up into working for the vendors, and I worked I worked in various roles, but they were all pan-European roles, usually in management or account management. And so, that progression for me was a sort of very warm path for a lot of folks who did that at the time. And it was probably around 2011, 2012 that I probably took on my biggest promotion, which was taking on the channel team at McAfee, where I ran the consumer and small business channel across EMEA. That was about 20 odd people, 20 odd account managers, plus a sort of matrix organization of partner marketing and operations and people. Tremendously good fun. I also moved to Ireland for that role. So it was a big sort of professional and personal change. And so, looking back at those days, that was probably the largest promotion that I had, the greatest step that I took in my career, and very enjoyable. I was there for just about 4 years.
Yeah. We will definitely have minimal degrees of separation if you were working in, working in antivirus and security software in that period, because, as I say, I would have been editing PC magazines around about that time. So that was a whole kind of world. We'd have all met at CeBIT at some point, kind of engaging in those spaces. But it's interesting that, this transition, if you like, from very broadly, but from hardware to security software into, I guess, cloud in the end, actually maps and mirrors to the way the industry has transitioned, right? Which does
Yeah.
speak to a certain amount of career management on your perspective, right? You were able to
Well,
see where the opportunities were, or is that just serendipity?
no, I suppose that's perhaps being too humble to say that serendipity. Um, yes, you're the first person that's pointed that out to me, and yeah, I have gone with the trends there. That's true. I mean, cybersecurity is still an incredibly hot
Yeah,
industry,
yeah,
but yes, leaping from that cybersecurity decade, I initially came out of Intel into the startup world. Again,
hmm
a very conscious choice. I was fascinated about what I'd heard about the differences between the corporate world and the startup world,
yeah,
and wanted to challenge myself, but also wanted to, have those sort of wealth creation moments that I'd heard about. And I thought, well, that's
yeah,
it. Which still hasn't materialized.
yeah. No, I've
But
heard about them too. I keep hearing about them. It's like, what do I say?
yeah, you're hearing about them, but you don't hear about the normal run of things, which is, it's actually just good fun. But yeah, I that third phase was moving into startup phase. So I spent a year as an MD of a fintech startup, and then I started out on my own with other co-founders, 3 in total, into probably a business that was before its day.
Mhm.
It was a clean tech business, a business focused on sustainability.
Uh-huh.
And I did that for just about 4 years, up until the end of 2020. And it was then that we actually, the business, had a number of headwinds. So I started looking around for something to do next. And my wife actually was working at AWS through those early days of COVID. So I could hear her from my office to her.
Yeah.
And she just seemed to be having so much fun. It seemed to be so entrepreneurial.
Uh-huh.
What I knew to be one of the largest corporates in the world. So
Yeah.
it was fascinating for me that how they could create such a culture with, a million plus employees. So when an opportunity came to join AWS, I jumped at the chance to see if I could really pass their interview process. It was more sort of
Yeah.
curiosity and being
Yeah.
challenging
Yeah.
myself. I never really thought about what happens if they offer me the job. And 5 1-hour interviews back to back.
Wow.
Pretty brutal. And they called me a couple of days later and said, "Yeah, would you come and join us?" And it was then that I thought, oh, okay, I need to make a decision. So, but it felt very natural to say yes, and of course, I've never looked back. It's now very much my life. What
Yeah.
I do. I haven't fallen very far from this tree since leaving AWS last year.
Yeah, but also like what a great set of experiences that bring you to this point, right? Where you're now, probably uniquely qualified in some ways to run the kind of business that you do because of all
Yeah.
those background experiences. Thank you for sharing that. That was really insightful and enjoyable. Too successful though. So now we're going to move on to section 2, which is what we call first fails, because we're not just here for the good stuff, right? And we do, you and I spoke before, I think we agree, we do learn more from our mistakes kind of thing. So I wonder, what is the first thing that comes to mind if I ask you to talk about a mistake you've made, a big mistake you've made?
Yeah, I did give this some thought when I saw you sort of say, "This is, this is the question we want a good answer to," and I thought, wow, what an insightful question, and I want to give everybody a useful answer. I think my biggest mistake is not being myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I realized particularly in that 10-year tenure at distribution, that I was adapting quite a lot to
Mm-hmm.
the environment that I was in. And it wasn't my natural self, being my work self. And perhaps that's a combination of youth and inexperience and all that. Perhaps everybody's like that. But I never grew out of it until probably knocking on 40. I realized actually, this adapting is exhausting. It's not genuine. I think people have noticed and are calling me out on it, not in direct ways, but in indirect ways. And I thought to myself, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm probably, hopefully, good enough being my authentic self. So I made a really key decision to sort of say, okay, I'm going to be an open book, be as I am, and let people make their own decisions based upon that. So it was a mistake that I repeated over probably 2 decades.
Yeah,
that's why I would probably class it as my first and biggest mistake. And now looking back at it, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted, but thank you, because that's such an insightful answer, and we've never had that, right? And I think it's probably relevant to everybody. I wonder, so many thoughts were going through my head while you were speaking just then. Certainly it resonates, right? And I think we're of a similar age. And I wonder if working practices and cultures are a bit different now. So maybe it's possible to sort of come out of that earlier. I certainly think about, this is a very kind of specific example, but the kind of pub culture of British business, which I certainly enjoyed, but did mean that people to get on behaved in a certain way at a certain time, kind of thing, which has definitely kind of gone away, which can only be a good thing. And I wonder if the way we now are able to articulate diversity in kind of the way people are, neurodiversity, allows for people, myself included, actually to be able to consciously think exactly what you said, which is really quite inspirational, actually. I am going to be myself. I am enough, kind of thing. Which doesn't mean that you're able to kind of, it's like the confusion people have between free speech and being able to say whatever you like without consequences, right? You still have to adapt to an environment to a certain extent. But I do think it's a very healthy thing to say, but I am going to be me because I'm good enough for this scenario and situation. That's a really great answer, and I appreciate you saying it.
No problem.
Yeah. The other question we like to ask at this time is that thing of, as you go through your career, as you're learning, as things happen. I think we all have those moments where the things that we, fundamentals to us previously, or just things we just thought we knew, turn out not to be true. And I wonder if you have an example of that, the first time you realized something you thought you knew might not actually be the case.
Yeah, that reminds me of a situation in that clean tech startup I co-founded, where we had got some incredible traction with BEIS, a government department managing business and energy. And we got our product into regulation, something called Boiler Plus, which was announced in 2018. And we very much built our business plan and our aspirations and our forecasts on what government was telling us were the goals for this regulation. And so we started proceeding on that basis. Those of us that had been involved with startups and made commitments, especially when you're spending other people's money, it can be very important to get that sort of vision and those forecasts right. And when we based it on government at a time when UK government was going through quite an upheaval, with general election, Brexit, and then finally with COVID, it turned out that the basis of our business was built upon very shaky foundations. So that was a very humbling experience for me. I'd never really encountered something that where I was so off with what was reality versus what we were forecasting, and couldn't do a lot about it. It was obviously out of our control, but that didn't change the fact that we made commitments as a board to shareholders and were struggling to meet them. So that was that was where I realized, okay, this has not gone at all the way I expected.
The thing you thought you could take to the bank, right? Because you did everything right there, really. and this is the nature of the startup world as well, but it's also the nature of working. You would have thought that the safest bet was actually the engagement you had with government. How could you have foreseen that? We lived through a very stable period actually, and then like to suddenly come into this piece. And I think the thing that really resonates there is like that thing of you can do everything right by the book that you've been given, and actually you turn out to be wrong, and you're holding the bag for someone else's money. That is that is a pretty emotional space to find yourself in. But again, appreciate you sharing that because that's a challenging one, right? But we move on. So Greg, I really appreciate like how insightful and open you're being. It's making for a really interesting conversation. And now we're going to move on because we want to get to know you a little bit beyond your professional veneer. So we're going to find out about you as a real person using our patented random question generator. So if you could please choose a question between 1 and 15, I would sincerely appreciate it.
It's 12.
12. Okay, let's have a look. Okay. The first thing you would save if you seem to have 2 abodes, but if your house was let's not say on fire because I never like to say that, but your house is going away somehow. What's the first thing you would save?
Okay, so other than my dogs and my wife,
and wife, that's a given.
Right. Okay, that's a given. Yeah. So this is again probably insight I shouldn't share, but I have a box of very sentimental things in the garage. Yeah, it must be in the garage. That are from my days. I've got 3 kids, and it's all the birthday cards and mostly seemingly weird stuff. Like my youngest is now 18. Loved going to an arcade where you get those, those pink tickets.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm still in that world. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So he loved collecting those pink tickets. He would persuade me to drive all the way over to Feltham to go to this arcade, and then he'd want to collect them and then spend them on sweets. So such lovely one-to-one time I spent with him. So things like that are in this box as just reminders of good days, nice things that I've got. So I'm a bit soppy like that.
No, I love it. I'm exactly the same. This is my office. It's a distance from the house. It looks reasonably neat and tidy from here, but if you were to turn the camera around, you would just see boxes and boxes of what my wife refers to as crap, but what I would call also sentimental tokens. And there's definitely some of those tickets in there somewhere. Although we would travel to Woking rather than Feltham to go to the terrible arcade to do that. Brilliant. Well, we always get something good. Can you give me another number between 1 and 15, and let's see if we can find
11.
Number 11. Okay, this might be interesting given what you said about where you winter. Like, what's the first place you moved away to from where you grew up? Like, what was the first time? Can you tell us something about living away from home, or maybe you never have?
Okay, first time I did it was when I was 18. I moved to France for 6 months. I worked for the holiday company Eurocamp.
Remember it well? Well, it's still going, isn't it? In fact, it's a very ongoing concern. Yeah.
It was fabulous. It was over a summer period. I think, about like 18. Yeah, so really enjoyed it. Joined a group of young people who were going around their campsites in northern France, maintaining caravans and tents, and doing just a lot of manual work, which made us all very hungry. We all got in the sort of is it called grub tent or something? The tent where we all ate in the evening, and I consumed huge amounts of French bread and Nutella. It's probably the first time I crossed Nutella. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It was the making of me in many ways. I'm away from home. with total strangers, totally on
Yeah.
my own. And that was
Stand on your own 2 feet, learn the value of a bit of hard work. And I noticed you didn't mention ever having to look after the junior Euro campers. So it sounds like you had the better gig there, I would say. Well, amazing. We always get something interesting from those questions, but they were really interesting and insightful answers. So thank you, Greg. And I can't believe this, but we're actually coming to our final section now, what we call first and final thoughts. But I am interested to hear from you, Greg. What would be the first piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out today?
I would, starting out today, I mean, what a world we're moving into with AI. So starting out today, I would think very much about the people and the tools that you're going to use. And just a year ago, I would have been more leaning in on people. But nowadays, I think there's so many tools out there that are now coming out because of AI and agentic AI that it's driving huge competitive advantage for folks that use those tools effectively. So I'm adding tools in as a very recent update. But tools and people, think about who you have in the business, how they gel with you, how your values line up to them. I can't underestimate the importance of when you're in a startup, scaling a business, or even growing a business within an established business. Your relationship with your team, the trust and respect you build has got to be based upon some sort of common understanding of values.
Yeah.
So, won't be necessarily attracted by, I don't know, the cheapest person in the market or the person that comes from a competitor or whatever like that. They sit entirely on whether that person is the sort of person that you want to spend your evening with.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. And I think actually the era of AI accelerates that in some ways because it can be, we talk a lot about this, like with IT leaders, like it's possible to do things faster and cheaper, right? But is that really driving value? And I think, that human side of things is exactly the same, right? You want to work alongside people who are, trying to solve their customers' problems rather than, do some kind of trickery or whatever that may be kind of thing. Not that I'm saying that is the binary choice, but I think people get a little bit blinded by the new capabilities that are coming along, and ultimately it all comes back to that core. What's the mission? What's the strategy that ladders up to the mission? And then we'll get the tactics that align with that. And a lot of that comes down to being around the right kind of people for you. Greg, sad to say this, but like our final question, but you've done a lot of things, right? We've talked about this. It's been a great sort of varied career, right from those early days at Eurocamp. But what's the first project or the first achievement professionally that you would want to tell people about? Like, what's your masterpiece if you can only talk about the one thing that you've done professionally?
From my past?
Yeah, or past, future, present. What is it that you kind of been most proud of from your career?
Yeah, I hope it's cloudable.
Yeah.
It's certainly looking promising. So this is the first business that I've done, or at least founded on my own. I've now got a very strong partnership with a company called CloudBridge and the founders there, Simon and Adam, and also a company called Bytes. That support has been very important to me because one of my heroes, Richard Branson, always said, surround yourself with people who are stronger than you in the areas that you're weak. So we've definitely achieved that. And doing this on my own is something that is a bit scary. So therefore, in the event that it becoming a sustainable business that's hopefully paying, helping dozens, if not hundreds of people, make their way through life, will be something that I'm looking forward to being proud of. Hopefully it's cloudable.ai, because it's one thing working for, big corporates, American corporates. It's another thing establishing something in this country right now that has impact and that provides people, with a livelihood.
Yeah. No, that's very, very cool. Great answer. Thank you, Greg. My thanks to Greg Finnegan, and thanks to you for watching or listening to First Person, the show where we meet the most interesting people in IT and learn from them what makes them tick by focusing only on their first. I have been your host, Matt Egan, asking you to enjoy, like, and subscribe wherever you find us. And if you are an interesting person in IT, do let us know. You might be the next first person. But I have to finish by giving my sincere thanks and appreciation to Greg Finnegan for a superb and open interview. Thank you, Greg, and goodbye to everybody. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.